to this Sunday service at Bielefeld Sunrise Church on July the 4th. And it shows at sunrise we are open and affirming to all that are curious, seeking, new believers, trying to find out together with us what it means to walk with Jesus in the 21st century. Church services start every Sunday at 10 a.m. online on our website, with both the sermon and the playlist available for streaming, as well as a home service at 5 p.m. with one sermon online as well. The home group is meeting at IBF, so please check back with Pastor Andy or online on the website for updates and details. The live stream devotional and praise on Facebook on Saturday evenings. As always, at 6 p.m., updates and details, please also check the Sunrise website. Please feel free to listen to the weekly praise playlist before the service, and also check out the new Sunrise playlists that are now available both on the homepage with links and on Spotify and YouTube with great music for your drive time and beyond. Now, let's look at today's topic. God is not in the Bible. God is not in the Bible. God, quote unquote, is not in the Bible. Deuteronomy 33, Isaiah 30, you can look these things up, and there are more Bible quotes. Language is more important than many of us realize. More precisely, the specific words we choose to use to impact our way of thinking. They impact our way of thinking, our social behavior, and many other perspectives of our lives. It's quite a fairly recent development in the human brain in terms of our long history as a species. The frontal lobes of our brains have actually expanded to handle its expanded work requirements. Now, there are certainly folks who do understand and acknowledge the importance and impact of language. For example, at the church here where I minister, we have an exceptionally hard time picking out hymns for Sunday service. I particularly struggle when it comes to the naming of God. Far too many hymns use masculine or aggressive terms for God, like Father, King, Lord, Shield, Defender, etc. You've heard it all. It's not just the controlling, combative image of God that concerns me, but also the way it prevents many people from seeing God in themselves. As children are growing up, my kid was growing up, the last thing I would have ever wanted would be for a girl to get the message that God was more like her brother than her. So that's also important for Sunday school groups. All of this is to say, I think a lot about language, and scientific evidence only reinforces with me that it is an exceptionally important task. Recently, I've started having issues with a word that, well, I never expected to have any problems with, namely God. I recall the local Lutheran evangelical church. They are running annual Lenten season topics, themes. And one year it was Bible fasting. And I found this in the evangelical days, I found this pretty outrageous. Yeah, stepping back from these important but weight carrying words like God, faith, and so on, and fasting from this. Still staying meditative, praying, focusing on the divine, but moving away from language. That's what it basically meant, looking at it in hindsight, moving away from diction, yeah, from putting it into these combative words, as I said earlier. Um, the roots of this problem became obvious a while back when I came across some kind of street preacher, which happens again and again. And what usually happens is street preachers are very zealous and off the mark, unfortunately, often a bit off the mark, because they do not convey to people what they actually want to relay to them, because they would scold them or they would incessantly quote Old Testament scripture, which for a non-believer or for a young believer is very hard to digest and to put into perspective. But that's just a side. So I came across that street preacher who was holding a Bible high above his head and shouting out, "God will save you from the fiery pits of hell." At some point, he looked right at me and said, "Son, have you given your life over to God?" I answered him saying, "I think the God that you know and the God that I know aren't the same God." I pretty much regretted responding that way from the moment I said it, but the fact is, I said it. As I've mentioned, Sunrise is a progressive church. Over time, it's been very interesting to listen to how various individuals name and or describe God. The truth is, if they use the name at all, very few only say God. It's much more likely that they say God than with a sort of apologetic look on their face for saying God. They'll add the universe, the spirit, thing that's larger than us, or something like that. Many of us have a theological issue with what the word God has come to represent. Conservative Christianity has always been the dominant social expression of Christianity, definitely in the US, where a lot of my theological background comes from. More specifically, since the 2016 presidential election. I wouldn't even say more specifically, I would rather say more blatantly and more obvious for those who didn't notice earlier. And it's become harder and harder to recognize the God that group worships as being anything close to biblical, above all when it comes to the teachings of Jesus. So it really isn't all that surprising that progressive Christians have started having issues with the word God. It turns out that while it is perfectly understandable that we are having issues with the term God because of how conservative Christians are using it, we should actually have a bigger problem with the word for an entirely different reason. It isn't in the Bible. Yep, God is not mentioned in the Bible. How's that? While it's true that even the earliest English translations of the Bible refer to the Hebrew-Christian deity as God, it's not only a poor but rather incorrect translation of the original Hebrew and Greek words used to refer to the deity. Worse yet, at least in my opinion, we've opted to use it as a proper name for God, which is something the Bible never does. In general, the Bible simply uses descriptors for God, particularly in the Old Testament. Elohai Kedem, the God of the beginning, Deuteronomy 33, verse 27. that I mentioned earlier. Elohai Mishpat, the God of justice. Isaiah 30, verse 18. Also mentioned Elohai Marom, the God of heights. Micah 6, verse 6. Elohai Mikarov, the God who is near. Jeremiah 23, 23. Elohai Mauzi, the God of my strength. Psalm 43, verse 2. Elohai Tehilati, the God of my praise. Psalm 109, verse 1. Elohim Chayim, the living God. Jeremiah 10, verse 10. Elohai Elohim, the God of gods. Deuteronomy 10, verse 17. Enough Bible quotes for the Bible friends. You might notice the recurrence of Elohai and Elohim. They are the singular and plural forms of the Hebrew word for deity. Sometimes they are shortened to simply El, as in El Yisrael, the God of Israel. Psalm 68, verse 35. El HaShamayim, the God of the heavens. Psalm 136, verse 26. El Deot, the God of knowledge. 1 Samuel 2, verse 3. El Elyon, the Most High God. Genesis 14, verse 18. Immanuel, Emmanuel, God is with us. Isaiah 7, verse 14. By capitalizing God, modern English translations give the impression that the uses of El, Elohim, are proper names rather than descriptors pointing to a deity. Not only that it's a translation whose roots stray from the intended understanding of Elohim, the Hebrew here indicates might, strength, most excellent, greatest, unequaled. However, Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary tells us that the word God comes from a Germanic word that means the invoked one. So not only do most modern English interpretations suggest that God is the proper name for the Hebrew/Christian deity, the use of the word God betrays the original implications of the Hebrew description of the deity. As I said, we should have bigger issues with the word God than just how conservatives are using it. In terms of the New Testament, most of the times we see the word God, it is replacing the Greek word theos, which is simply the Greek word for deity. Interestingly enough, it is typically preceded by a form of the Greek definite article ho, yet again seeming to indicate that it is not meant to be the name of the deity. Admittedly, this is a relatively recent exploration of mine. In most ways, I find it very freeing to recognize that God is not in the Bible. It feels much less confining and seems to give God, quote unquote, a breadth of understanding that is much needed. I'm not saying others shouldn't use the term God in referring to the Christian deity. I'm simply saying that it is not so easy to define and box God in when we don't. If anything, it should give us permission to play with descriptions of the God of the universe, to vary how we describe the God of compassion in conversations, to not be so hemmed in naming the God who is and ever will be. For me, it's not just freeing, it pushes me to consider my understanding of the God who ties us together in deeper more meaningful terms. And that is an incredibly exciting journey to be on.